If you hear any singing while you're sailing, it's best to put in earwax, because today we are reading The Sirens from the book Myths and Legends by William G. Doughty, edited by Jake Jackson. So let's get started. The air was hot and heavy around the vessel. The sunlight glinted on her bow as she cut through the silent sea. The men were restless. The silence held the threat of ill fate, and they looked to Odysseus with weary eyes, seeking his wisdom, begging him wordlessly for comfort. Odysseus stood tall alongside the mast, his noble profile chiseled against the airless horizon. He looked troubled, his head cocked to one side as he heard the whispers of a beautiful melody. It stung and tore at his sanity, dredging up a memory, a warning, but lulling him somehow away from his men, from his responsibilities, from the course of his voyage. He struggled against the growing sound, alert to the knowledge that his men had not yet heard its seductive strains, but every fiber of his being ached to find its source, to touch its creator. The sirens. The words leapt to his troubled mind, and with great effort he drew himself from the reverie. "Lash me to the mast," he cried suddenly. Something in his voice caused his astonished men to obey. "But, Captain, sir," one of the younger seamen ventured to express his amazement. Now Odysseus felt the bewildered hurt of his men. He also heard the growing symphony of the sirens. He felt himself being drawn back, their melody licking at his mind like the hottest of fires, burning his resolve and his sanity. "The candles," he mouthed groggily. "Melt the candles." He could barely choke out the words. "The wax in your ears." A startled silence was filled by the roaring of Odysseus's first mate. "Do as he says, men. We have never had cause to question the wisdom of Odysseus. He has the strength and the cunning of 10 men. He sees what we cannot see. He must put our faith in him." The ears of each man were carefully plugged by the wax of 40 candles. As the last man turned his head, a swell of sound filled the air. Odysseus gave himself to it, wrestling with the lashings that restrained his strong frame. The sweet song of death called him, beckoned him from his lofty post. The sirens, the birds of death, temptresses of darkness, their sensuous melody played on the chords of his mind, calling him to a blackness which would envelop him forever. They appeared around him, luxuriant hair tumbling around angelic faces. He was trapped in a swarm of soaring wings and resplendent feathers. Women of the birds, with voices to lull even the hardiest warriors to certain death. The deafening crew of his ship watched in amazement as the elegant creatures swooped among them, their ears gleaming with secret knowledge, their voices capturing Odysseus in a cloud of passionate yearning. Befuddled by the play on his senses, Odysseus signaled to his men to begin to row. Then he sank back against the mast, spent and sickened by longing. The mighty vessel collected speed, plowing through the sea that rippled with the thrusts of the sirens and the power of their music. The sound increased, their music tortuously alluring as the sirens fought for the spirit of Odysseus. The men battled with their oars, churning the water aside, sensing the danger that had hewn such fear on the face of their leader. The music of the sirens took on a rising note of mirth, and then, as the ship surged away from their grips, they laughed aloud. "You will be ours again," they sang together, laughing and dividing around the falling men. "Ours to the end." They rose in a cluster of discord and light and disappeared, a painful silence filling the cacophony of sound that was no more. Odysseus rose again. He looked to the east, to the island of the sirens. He signaled to his men to clear their ears. He'd had to hear it. Circe had warned him of the sirens, and although he trusted not the weak natures of his men, he had relished the chance to tempt his own resolve. But it was a bitter triumph, for he'd very nearly been lost to them, tugged so close to the edge of his mind, to madness and the darkness beneath. A sweet wind caught the mainsail, and the ship plunged forward. Their small victory raised a smile on the weather-beaten faces of the seamen, and then they returned to the faces to waters of new.